Greetings and salutations, everybody. XLJ, the OG from Cold TV, and welcome back to Back in the Day. Now, here on Back of the Day, we go through the rich history of World Championship Wrestling. We highlight some of the greatest rivalries, matches, merchandise, and so much more. But as always, we kick it off here with our top story of the week. And this week, we're going to go all the way back to July the 17th of 1994, where Hulk Hogan would make his debut in World Championship Wrestling and defeat the Nature Boy Ric Flair for the WCW title at Bash at the Beach 1994. Now, at the time, WCW signing Hulk Hogan was a huge and monumental get for World Championship Wrestling. Because number one, it didn't seem like this would be anything that would ever be feasible. And number two, WCW was still looked down upon as kind of like the Southern boys, just like that number two promotion in professional wrestling. But this move really put WCW on the map, regardless if you like Hulk Hogan or not. This was the first real move in like making WCW say, you know what, we can be the number one promotion in all of North America. So at the time, Hulk Hogan had pretty much been retired from the World Wrestling Federation for almost a year now. He hadn't really wrestled or anything like that. He had really been focused on his film career. At the time, he was recording and filming his show Thunder in Paradise, which he thought was going to be like huge. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Come on, it's a show about like an ex-military guy who has like a boat that does cool shit. I don't know. It was in syndication. So Eric Bischoff would come knocking at the Hulkster's door, practically like giving him everything he could ever want and more, giving him a huge, massive contract, but most importantly, that CC, that creative control. And well, the Hulkster ended up fighting and thus joined World Championship Wrestling. Now, I'll never forget like the build up to this as a kid, because like they had like a ticker tape parade for him at like Disney's MGM Studios and stuff, where they filmed like a lot of their shows for World Championship Wrestling. And it was just made out to be like such a huge deal. Honestly, as a fan, I was kind of bummed out about this, because like really part of the reason I loved WCW so much at this time frame was because it didn't have Hulk Hogan in it. So, as a kid, it was kind of a bummer, but in hindsight, you totally can understand why they would do this. And finally, we got the mega matchup that we should have saw at WrestleMania 8 between Hulk Hogan and the Nature Boy Ric Flair. So, in the build-up to this matchup, Ric Flair was already a babyface, but they decided to combine the WCW World title with the WCW International title, which was held by Sting at the time, which, if you look back on the lineage, was actually the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, but then they switched it over and called it the International title because the NWA did not want to work with WCW anymore. It's a long story for another time. So essentially, at the Clash of the Champions a couple months prior to Bash at the Beach, Ric Flair would unify those belts by defeating Sting. Now, Hulk Hogan was there at this Clash of the Champions to confront whoever the winner would be, which ultimately was Ric Flair. And it just set up their rivalry, essentially there, because the Hulkster was there to do good, brother. Say your prayers, eat your vitamins, buy my shit. Ugh. Another element to this story was Ric Flair's pairing with one Sensational Sherry as his manager, which I gotta say, I absolutely loved. Even though it was a short time they were together, I thought Sherry and Ric Flair made perfect sense. Sherry's one of the most underrated talents in all professional wrestling, in my opinion. And she just killed it as in the role of this evil manager. And it also helped to get Ric Flair some more heat, because that's the thing. Ric Flair had been pretty much WCW the majority of his career. So now, was this WCW crowd going to accept the red and yellow, the goody two-shoe guy from the World Wrestling Federation? Which it was a little bit of a hard sell, but at the same time, too, as Turner and World Championship Wrestling decided to kind of expand out and become more out of the southern region, as they toured quite frequently all throughout the United States at this point. So it worked for them. So get to that fateful day, July the 17th, the Bash at the Beach, which ultimately did end up being, at the time, the highest grossing pay-per-view for World Championship Wrestling ever. You have this matchup with the Hulkster going up against Ric Flair that took place in Orlando, Florida. And because it's in Orlando, why not have Shaquille O'Neal involved, who's a big wrestling fan to begin with. So Shaq is involved kind of like as a special enforcer role, I think is what they officially called it. But he's pretty much in the corner of Hulk Hogan. I mean, it was kind of like whatever. And to me, this is like an interesting pay-per-view because if you look at the undercard and you compare it to like the main event, it's truly like a legit changing of the guard, especially if you look at like the last pay-per-view before this for WCW, which I think was like Spring Stampede or something. Completely different roster of wrestlers, and you could just tell, like, just with that Hogan rub, it felt different. So Flair and Hogan have their matchup, which was a pretty decent matchup, and as you can imagine, Hulk Hogan would win the WCW Championship. I mean, why wouldn't he? I mean, they're going to pay him a ton of money to kind of come in and, like, you know, would you have him lose to Ric Flair right off the bat? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And thus Hogan would hold on that title for pretty much over a year and become the face of WCW. And I think at first it really worked. It did present some challenges on down the road where people just kind of got tired of it, especially as the years went on. But still, nonetheless, when they first brought Hulk Hogan into World Championship Wrestling, it was the biggest thing WCW had ever done. And hey, let's keep this in mind too. If they didn't do this, would the NWO succeed as well without Hulk Hogan? Honestly, probably not. Like I say, whether you love him or hate him, you gotta give Hulk Hogan credit where credit's due. And that, my friends, is this week's Story of the Week here on Back in the Day. Now, here on Back in the Day, we always like to take a look back and look at some of the great matches throughout the history of World Championship Wrestling. Back to the year 1999, specifically Slamboree 1999, to take a look at the World Championship Tag Title three-way matchup between Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko, going up against Rey Mysterio Jr. and Kidman, and Raven and Perry Saturn. Now, this match, man, this is a hidden gem of a match. Like, you have 6 of some of the best workers going in World Championship Wrestling at this time frame. And such unique tandems here, too, because Rey and Kidman were kind of rivalries going back and forth on the Cruiserweight title. Of course, this is a time frame, too, where the idiotic decision was made to where Rey Mysterio would lose his mask. So now he's maskless, but he's still like super over. He's like one of the top cruiserweights. Of course, Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko being part of the Four Horsemen. And what was the interesting wild card of this matchup, I felt like, was the combination of Raven and Perry Saturn. So, I mean, they had already broken up out of the flock, and really neither of these guys weren't doing a whole heck of a lot of the time, so they just decided to put them together as a tag team. But man, they worked so well as a tag team, too. And as much as I love Raven from a standpoint of like his character and the psychology and the promos and stuff, Raven was a hell of an in-ring worker, and I really think this match shows you just that. Now, Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko had been the previous tag team champions until they dropped them to the tandem of Rey Mysterio and Kidman. And boy, those guys had some great matchups. And of course, when we're talking Benoit and Malenko, we are talking in the Four Horsemen era here as well. But these guys, all 6 of these guys, really helped revitalize the tag team division, which at the time was kind of weak. I mean, the titles have kind of been thrown under the bus. They did have a championship tournament back in February of this year. And Benoit and Malenko were primarily involved in the tag team title race at that time frame. Also interesting to note, too, that these tag team titles would be the first long reigning, at least, when I say long reigning, you know, a couple weeks to a month or whatever, because this is WCW 99, come on. But nonetheless, for Chris Benoit, first real title he kind of held. So this was the opening contest, and man, oh man, like, did they set a pace that really nobody could keep up with on the rest of the show. But this match almost goes 20 minutes, and surprisingly enough, Raven and Saturn win the World Tag Team titles in this one, too. Which I thought was just really cool to see. But this is a phenomenal hidden gem sleeper of a matchup, and you should really check it out. And that's why it's our match of the week here on Back in the Day. Now, here on Back in the Day, we always like to take a look at some of the great rivalries throughout the history of World Championship Wrestling. And today, we are going to take a look at the very heated rivalry all the way back from 1995 to 96. I'm talking about that one between Nature Boy Ric Flair and the Macho Man Randy Savage. Now, the Macho Man and Ric Flair were no strangers to each other, of course. They had feuded in the World Wrestling Federation in 1992. and had a heated rivalry there involving Miss Elizabeth. Now, this rivalry, how it really got started, was at the Macho Man and Hulk Hogan were best friends, and they were going up against Vader, and Ric Flair got brought back from retirement to kind of be to help out in the war, to help end Hulkamania with Vader, and later on the Dungeon of Doom. But how it kicked off really between the Macho Man and Ric Flair was at Slamboree 95 when Ric Flair assaulted the Macho Man's father, Angelo Poffo, who had just been put in the Hall of Fame that night. So the build-up for this was the Macho Man was wanting to get his hands on Ric Flair. And like at this point too, the Macho Man was just like playing the crazy psycho, like Macho Man, like I'm gonna kill you, essentially. Which he did a great job at too, because even his kid was like, damn, Macho Man's gonna mess him up. Now, ironically enough, the Macho Man and Ric Flair would be involved in the United States title tournament going on at that time frame, and lo and behold, they would actually end up meeting in the semi-final matchup. Or would they? So as it goes, pretty much, the match never got to the ring as the Macho Man pretty much attacked Ric Flair. They brawled outside, and essentially they were both eliminated from the title tournament. However, the Macho Man would get his hands eventually on Ric Flair in a sanctioned matchup as they would meet American Bash 1995 in the main event. Now, interesting enough too, this show was actually set and took place on Father's Day. So still playing off the fact that Ric Flair did attack the Macho Man's father. And Angelo Poffo actually would be in the Macho Man's corner in this matchup. The main event, it was just another great Ric Flair Macho Man matchup, because as we always say here on Back in the Day, what makes some of the greatest rivalries is those guys who have incredible chemistry with each other, and Ric Flair and the Macho Man worked very well with each other. Now, interesting enough, Ric Flair would win this matchup, and I find it interesting because he used Angelo Poffo's cane, which Angelo Poffo was using because Ric Flair had injured him. Now, the feud would continue on, and they would meet at Bash at the Beach 1995 as part of a lifeguard match, which it's a lumberjack match. But it was on the beach, so we gotta change up the gimmick, because who really would want to be wearing lumberjack shirts and jeans like in 110-degree weather on the beach? Just saying. So, the Macho Man would go on and defeat Ric Flair in this lifeguard matchup. And you would think that would be the end of the rivalry. But, no, it didn't really go away, necessarily. Ric Flair would kind of, like, go on to some different rivalries as well as Macho Man. But they kind of would come back at the end of 1995 when Ric Flair would defeat Macho Man Randy Savage for his WCW World title. Now, fast forward to the beginning of 1996, this damn title was like a hot potato between the two, because then the Macho Man would win it on an episode of Nitro from Caesar's Palace, and then they would have a matchup at Super Brawl 6 inside of a steel cage where the Macho Man would meet Ric Flair for the world title, and of course Ric Flair would win the world title back. And now Ric Flair would get really dirty as he would bring one Miss Elizabeth into the rivalry, and thus Miss Elizabeth actually aligned herself with the Nature Boy Ric Flair. So Ric Flair went for that low-hanging fruit pretty much in this rivalry, and then like they just feuded all throughout like most of '96, just back and forth, with the Macho Man just constantly trying to get his hands at Ric Flair. They would end up being partners as part of the Lethal Lottery Battle Bowl for Slamboree of 1996. Of course, ultimately, they would win one match, surprisingly, but they would not advance in the tournament because they just went at it at each other. Now, it went so far as to even Ric Flair getting the Macho Man banned from wrestling in WCW, but it didn't say anything about him being a manager. So then the Macho Man would be the manager of one Steve Mongo McMichael and Kevin Green as they went up against Ric Flair and Arn Anderson of the Horsemen. Now ultimately, Steve McMichael would turn on Kevin Green and join the Four Horsemen and leave the Macho Man and kind of Kevin Green out in the dark. Now after that, that's pretty much the end of this rivalry, because at this point the NWO is coming to World Championship Wrestling, and of course the focus turned there. But man, especially as a kid, like I remember this rivalry very vividly, and out of like the matches that Savage and Flair had, to me this is what I remember the most, is in this WCW era of 1995 to 1996. And like I say, anytime you got these two guys together, it was money. It was a phenomenal, like they have phenomenal chemistry with each other. It just worked. And that is our rivalry of the week here on Back in the Day. Now, if you follow me, you know I'm a huge collector of things, and one of those things I love to collect is wrestling magazines. And here on Back in the Day, we always like to highlight one of those great magazines. And for our magazine this week, we're going to be taking a look at Pro Wrestling Illustrated's April 1996 issue. And of course, you can see Hulk Hogan here on the cover, talking about the WCW World title in some turmoil. So let's take a look. Alright. Pro Wrestling Illustrated from March of 96. There you see it on the cover. First Hogan, then Thank It, then Savage, then Flair. What's going on with the WCW World title? And only Hulk Hogan can bring back the sanity. Let's take a look. There we go. The cover story. It's mine, brother. The Macho Man Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan here. Look at this epic stare down. So, pretty much at the time, like, Hogan had the stranglehold on the title, and then the Giant had defeated him, in air quotes, at Halloween Havoc 95. They declared the title vacant afterwards. Macho Man would win the World War III Battle Royal to become the new WCW champion. And then from there, he would drop it at Starrcade 95 to the Nature Boy Ric Flair, which we did touch on earlier in this episode. And would go on to change it back and forth between Flair and Savage, but Hogan's like, brother, I got creative control. I need that belt back, dude. He goes highlighting the WCW World War III matchup where Macho Man won the belt. Because remember, too, in the World War III matchup, Hogan was never officially eliminated. He was actually dragged underneath the rope. And I have to say, the first World War III was definitely the best one. It was actually a pretty good matchup. And then, oh, the dark Hulk Hogan. And there you see him questioning his brother Sting, which they did meet in a matchup here on Nitro. And then here you got the Nature Boy over here. Nope, it's actually mine, fellas. And I think he would get at least 2 to 3 world title reigns during this time frame. And they're still going on about the World War III fallout as well. And there you see, like, of course, Macho Man was in a bitter rivalry with Lex Luger at this time frame as well. Oh, here's a story on the Public Enemy. Now, what I find interesting about this, it talks pretty much about how they tried going to the WWF, and it pretty much did not work out for them. And essentially, why we're highlighting this is because Public Enemy would end up going to WCW in 1996 and actually have a pretty successful run. And speaking of World War III, you can order the VHS tape. Check it out. Just send your money here, folks, for $49.95. What a steal. Now here, as part of the Between the Falls, where they talk about miscellaneous stories throughout the world of wrestling, talks about the Horsemen getting back together, because remember, Ric Flair had been in a rivalry with Arn Anderson and Brian Pillman, and then it was revealed that the Horsemen were back together, and they would, of course, be joined by their 4th member, Chris Benoit, but interestingly enough, there's Chris Benoit's bestie in the ring, Eddie Guerrero. Here's the scouting report, and hey, since we're talking WCW here, there's Eddie Guerrero. Interestingly enough, he was ranked number 17 in the PWI 500 the year prior to this. Oh, and let's look at PWI's top 10 at the time frame. Well, we got the Macho Man from WCW's in there at number 2. We got the Giant at number 4. Sting at 6. Johnny B. Bad at 8. Hulkster at 10. And let's see our top rankings in WCW's. Of course, Macho Man at the time's world champion. We got Katsuki Sasaki, who was the U.S. champion, at number 1. The Giant at 2. Hulk Hogan at 3. Johnny B. Bad, the world television champion, at 4. Sting at 5. Luger at 6. Flair at 7. Eddie Guerrero at 8. Brian Pillman at 9. And DDP rounding out the top 10. And well, it wasn't a very heavy issue on everything that happened in World Championship Wrestling, but still, they were the top story in the PWI March of 1996 magazine, which is our magazine of the week here on Back in the Day. And as always here on Back in the Day, we like to take a look at some of the more unique merch throughout the history of World Championship Wrestling. And today we're going to take a look at some merch I didn't even really know existed. Talking about from 1999 or 2000 era. You remember the Vampiro mask? That's right, you could actually get a mask of Vampiro. But you got to keep in mind at this time frame, Vampiro is kind of put into a rivalry with Sting. It first started off as a friendship between the two as the brothers in paint. So, what the hell, he's got paint on? Let's just market it to the kids and make a mask. And that's what WCW did. Now, I don't know a whole lot about this mask other than what I've seen in the images here. I don't know if this was something Toy Biz made. I'm not sure if it was maybe just made for like around Halloween time or something, but I don't know, man. It's pretty trippy to see. I can't imagine being a kid and like actively, as much as I love Vampiro, I don't think I would really want a Vampiro mask. This thing is just creeping the hell out of me just looking at this thing. But this was one of the many merch that did exist in World Championship Wrestling, and hey, it's our merch of the week here on Back in the Day. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Back in the Day. And hey, if you love everything that's going on here on World Championship Wreckage's YouTube channel, then why don't you just hit that like and subscribe button? That's all you have to do. You can see so much amazing content they have on here. And speaking of amazing content, if you like the content you see here, why don't you head over to Cole TV, where we have all sorts of content, a lot wrestling related. We have 2 weekly wrestling podcasts, such as Pro Wrestling 60, where we cover everything that happened in the world of wrestling in 60 minutes the previous week, as well as our show Learning the Ropes, where we go through and do a deep dive on the history of professional wrestling. And we have more shows than just that. We have shows such as I'm Your Huckleberry, The Hunt, Chub Life, Friday Night Movie Night, and so much more. So why don't you come on over and join the revolution that is Cole TV. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Back in the Day. I'm XLJ the OG, and we'll see you at the matches.